Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. It has been a while since we did a canning video together, and my garden is just cranking out the cherry tomatoes. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to share one of the ball canning recipes with you for corn and cherry tomato salsa. And the great part about this recipe is you do not have to peel your tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes are small and have a really tender skin, and they have somehow managed to work that into this recipe. So I love me a time saver, especially when I have piles and piles of cherry tomatoes like what you see in front of you here. So I'm going to start off by weighing my tomatoes, and you're going to need 5 pounds of cherry tomatoes. Now, these came from my garden, and all I did was just pick them and store them in a bag in the refrigerator until I had enough to go ahead and make this recipe. Now, because you don't have to peel all of these tomatoes, the recipe just asks that you roughly chop them. And if you don't have any fancy kitchen equipment, it's really easy. It's a little time consuming, but you can sit and chop these by hand with a knife, or if you have, one of those small choppers that you pull the string on, that will work too. But I happen to have a food processor, so I decided that I was just going to make quick work of all of these tomatoes and run them through my food processor. Now, I'm not going to puree them. I'm just going to pulse them until everything is just kind of chopped up. Some will be smaller than others, which is fine because when we cook this salsa, the tomatoes are going to go ahead and cook down some more. Now, the second ingredient you're going to need for this recipe is about 2 cups of corn. Now, they are pretty liberal with the recipe. They say you can use fresh corn or frozen and thawed corn. But there happen to be sweet corn in the grocery store right now, so I'm going to use fresh. And it says that that should be about 2 ears of corn to make the 2 cups. However, I did end up needing a third ear because these are kind of small. And if you're curious about this little tool I'm using here, I highly recommend this to anyone who processes large amounts of corn, either for freezing or for canning. It really does make quick work of stripping the kernels off of a cob of corn. And I have tried probably every hack, to strip the corn from the cob in the easiest way possible. And for me, this little gadget right here, while it is a unitasker, it does make very fast work of this corn, as you can see. It works very much like a potato peeler. So if you're interested, I will leave a link to this below. Definitely recommend it for my home canners who process corn in the summertime. So we're just going to go ahead and move through these 3 ears of corn until I have about 2 cups, and then we will move on to the rest of the prep. And just in case I didn't mention it, I think that this would be a fantastic recipe for starter canners, people that are just beginner canners, because this is a water bath recipe and the prep is super simple. And altogether, I think it maybe took me 30 minutes to crank out this recipe. It probably wouldn't have taken that long if I hadn't been filming. But definitely, if you're new to canning, try this one. It seems like an advanced recipe, but it is so simple. So the ball recipe requires 1 cup of red onion, and because this red onion was super huge, I'm just going to start with half of it, and I'm going to dice it up pretty small. It just says diced small on the recipe. And I'm going to need a cup of that. So I don't think I even ended up using a half of a red onion. Yeah, see, a half of a red onion. So that ended up being the perfect amount for 1 cup measure. And once I get my onion all diced, I'm just going to run my knife through it just to make sure that I don't have any really big pieces. I don't want anybody to end up with just a giant bite of red onion when I end up using this salsa. The next thing we're going to get ready is a couple of jalapenos. Now, I picked these out of my garden this morning, and they are a little on the small side. But that's fine. I don't mind. My jalapenos were much bigger at the beginning of the season, and all of the fleshes that it's putting on now are about half the size of the ones I got in the spring. But it'll do the job. So you're just going to split them and seed them. I saw no options for leaving in the seeds, so I don't know. I can't recommend that you do that. Maybe reach out to your local extension office if you would like to use a different pepper or a spicier pepper or leaving in the seeds. I am not a master canner, so I don't want to speak to saying, yeah, sure, go ahead and leave the seeds in because I don't know if that's actually safe. And I'm just going to dice up these jalapenos kind of small, and I'm going to drop them in with my corn and move on to my cilantro. Now, I know I say in every video that I use cilantro. If you don't like it, if you are one of the soap crew, leave it out. Well, that especially applies to this canning recipe. If you do not like cilantro, do not add it to your salsa. If you add cilantro to your salsa, it is going to strengthen and intensity. And by the time the salsa has sat in your pantry and had time to develop its flavor, and you open that jar, it is going to be like you are drinking dish soap. It's going to be very unpleasant. So don't think, well, I don't like cilantro, but maybe I can handle it because there's not a lot. No, it will amplify in intensity. So just leave it out if you are part of the soap crew. I like cilantro, so I'm going with it. I'm going to need about a half a cup of that. And that is all of the prep work we need to do, and we can start to assemble our salsa. I'm just going to go ahead and dump all of those chopped tomatoes directly into a heavy bottom pot. You're definitely going to want a thick bottomed stock pot or a ceramic pot like this one. You don't want to use aluminum. It's going to lend a very yucky flavor to your salsa, and it's probably going to scorch. So I'm going to dump all of my ingredients, the corn, the jalapenos, the red onion, the cilantro, and then we're going to add a couple more things. Now this next ingredient is totally optional. The recipe even states it is optional, but I'm going to add some chipotle powder to my pan here. And that's going to add a little bit of heat and a nice sweet smokiness to my salsa. So I'm definitely not skipping out on this. I need a teaspoon of this added directly into the pot. And the last thing I'm going to add is a half a cup of bottled lime juice. Now, I would imagine if you don't have lime juice, you could probably use lemon juice, but I'm not really sure on that. It does need to be bottled and not fresh, though. Maybe someone who has a little more experience in canning or a master canner can leave a comment down below and let us all know if you can substitute lemon or lime for lemon. And I will pin that comment just in case anybody had curiosity about that. So I'm just going to give this a really good stir to make sure everything is mixed, and I'm going to put this on high heat and bring this to a boil. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of liquid in this pan, but as these tomatoes cook, they're going to release a lot more liquid. And it doesn't take very long in a heavy bottom pot to bring this up to a boil. Just keep an eye on it and come back and stir it every now and then. Once you get it boiling, you're going to turn your heat back a little bit and just let this simmer for 5 to 10 minutes. I actually let mine go for the full 10 minutes. I wanted to make sure that those tomatoes were cooked down a little bit, and I went through and any that were still kind of large, I smushed them with the spoon. So this is what my salsa looked like after simmering for 10 minutes. And as you can see here, I still had a couple stragglers there that were large, so I just used the back of my spoon to kind of smash them down. It was no problem whatsoever. So I'm going to go ahead and get set up, and we are going to start putting this salsa into some jars. Now, while I was getting everything ready, I had my pint jars and some hot water in my water bath canner. You need to make sure if you're new to canning that you have your jars on a rack. Now, this recipe says it will make 6 pints of salsa, but the golden rule is it depends on how juicy your vegetables are or whatever it is you're canning. I always put a couple of extra jars in because I don't think I have hardly ever had a recipe come out with exactly what they say I'm going to have. And in fact, I ended up with just a little bit extra this time. So put some extra jars in your canner, and that way you're not running around like a chicken with your head cut off trying to grab jars because you have more salsa than you thought you were going to have. So I'm going to do 2 jars here. All I'm going to do is ladle this in to my clean hot jar. You want to make sure your jars are hot, your salsa's hot. You don't want any thermal shock. Your jar will explode. It's very unpleasant to lose jars. They are costly. So I'm going to fill this up to a half an inch of headspace. I'm going to take my chopstick and I'm going to go around and debubble. This is pretty liquidy and it doesn't really hold on to a lot of air, but it's best practice to just routinely debubble even if you don't think that it needs it. Then I'm going to take a clean paper towel and I'm going to wipe the top of my jar off here. This is a good opportunity to check and make sure that you don't have any dings on your jar. And wiping off the rim of it will make sure that your lids seal good. If there's anything left on the top of that jar, you compromise your seal and you may end up losing jars because they didn't seal up properly or having to reprocess them. And you'll see here on the second jar that I'm about to do, when I wipe the rim of this jar, you can actually see the tomato sauce or the salsa that was on the rim. Now, I'm using 4 jars canning lids. This is not sponsored. I bought them with my own money. I happened to catch a sale like last year, so I have a ton of them I'm trying to use up. But just know that if you are using 4 jars lids, the material that is on the lid that makes the seal is a little thicker than like ball jar lids if you're used to using ball lids. So when you go to put your ring on and make it finger tight, you are going to have to twist it just a tiny bit tighter. I haven't had an issue with, my lids not sealing. So I really don't have a ton of complaints about these lids, but just know that finger tight has to be just a smidge tighter with these lids to get a good seal. So once I got through this salsa and got everything into my water bath canner, I ended up with 6 pints, which is what the recipe said, plus a half a pint. So always make sure, like I said, that you're putting extra jars in, and if you don't use them, they'll just keep the rest of your jars from bouncing around. So I'm going to put a lid on this. I'm going to turn the temperature up, and I'm going to let this come up to a rolling boil. I'm going to let it boil for 15 minutes and then I'm going to turn the heat off. Look at this cute little lid lifter my daughter made me. I just had to brag on her for a second. Isn't that adorable? So once it's done, I'm just going to crack the lid of this pan and let this water kind of cool down and stop boiling. If you tried to take your jars out right away, they're going to crack or you might have siphoning. And after 10 minutes, I just remove my jars from the water to a towel so that they're not being placed onto a cool countertop. Thermal shock goes for the air, the liquid around it, or even the surface that you're setting your jar on. So find an old towel and just set your jars right on that old towel and it will cushion them and keep them from coming directly into contact with a cold surface. I'm not going to bother these jars for 24 hours. I'm going to come back. I'm going to take the rings off, test the seals. I'm going to give them a good wash, and then I'm going to label and date them and stick them right on in my pantry. And I'm going to let them sit for a couple weeks before I give them a try. But these jars are really beautiful. I cannot wait to use this salsa. I'm going to give it a couple of weeks sitting on the shelf so all the flavors can kind of come together. And then I'm probably going to serve this as a side on taco night. It is just absolutely beautiful in the jar. And it was the next level perfect use for the piles and piles and piles of cherry tomatoes that I had just stacking up in the refrigerator. I think when I serve this, I'm going to take a jar of my home canned black beans and rinse them and add that to it to kind of bulk this salsa up. So I hope you give this recipe a try, and if you do, definitely come back and leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about this canning recipe. And until next time, friends, happy canning.